Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. I continue my conversation with Gorkem Ercan, the founding distinguished engineer and CTO of Jozu. Gorkem has experience working and leading teams with various technologies ranging from building IDEs to building mobile phones and CI/CD systems. He is also an avid contributor and supporter of open source. We continue our conversation. In the last part, I asked him about tips for time management, and he shares both for time management as well as prioritization and the importance of giving back to the open source community, why one should use open source and why one should also give back to the open source. He shares some of the frustrations with open source, or at least organizations that use open source but not actively support the movement, and about work-life balance. And we touch upon once again on some tips for newcomers and his invitation to everyone to contribute to the kitops.ml project. Details on that in the show notes. Listen on. How do you plan your time? From two perspectives. One is, of course, the effort that it takes to create something. And on an ongoing basis, because it's not that you can take your own time and make progress at your own pace to adjust with the rest of the team. So what kind of demand on time would it be?
Well, it depends. Like there are certain times where it gets really, really busy, and you need to balance your priorities. Like I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to set the priorities for yourself and for your team. And in my case, I need to get everyone in my team to know what those priorities are and what they should be focused on all the time. So we do have that visible on Jozu. We do have that visible for everyone to see what are those priorities for the whole company. So I think that's part of the transparency that we have inherited. And Jozu has a lot of people who have been part of open source community for a long time as well. So that's part of the culture that we inherited from open source. So, and as a personal planning, that's also how I look at it as well. I take a look at, what are my priorities, and if there are PRs that needs to be reviewed for a project that is health active for the last 2 years, that's probably not high on my list. It's still in my list, but it's not very high on my list. So you may see me doing that PR what PR review while waiting for the plane on an airport, but you won't see me doing that as first thing in the morning. So I try to keep, I'm very visual, so I try to keep a visual priority list for myself as well. all the time so that I can always go back and change the priorities. Priorities always changes. It's a organic thing. It's not set in stone. It always changes. It's like the whole definition of organic. It means that it always it grows and changes with the environment as well. So it changes with the environment. So you need to like take a look at it and do minor adjustments all the time. That's what I try to do. So I do have a to-do list that allows me to look at it all the time as a priority order. And these things don't need to be very fancy, to be honest. When I first started doing this sort of priority backlogs, our first backlog was on a Excel sheet.
Okay.
And that probably was the best priority backlog I have ever worked with. So
after putting in a lot of energy and time and everything else, now how does it feel to just give it away? Now, particularly since you are also part of an organization, even though it's nice to hear that many of your colleagues also have experience in open source or continue to do that. Balancing these two kind of different models working, and then something that's been like your passion that you've done and just giving it away.
So when you are in the early days, if you're doing this, like not as part of your company, but as part of your personal involvement, it feels great. It feels better than any other software that you will be able to write. And there is a reason for that. The Java language server that I have started, I think it has over 30 million downloads that the VS Code reports. And when I started the project, I never thought that we would ever get a fair share in the Java tooling space with the VS Code Java plugin. But now people, like last time I checked, people talk about 1 to 5% market share. And this is a market that we share with Eclipse IDE and IntelliJ and on any other tool you can think of. And these are really good tools. They are, very well established. So from that perspective, it is very satisfying. So it's one of those, if you can get your software, if you can get your work in front of hundreds of people or thousands of people and millions of people, I think that's very satisfying. But on the other hand, over the years, as you get involved with open source, the one thing that you realize is the open source projects themselves do not stay healthy if there isn't an economic reason for them to exist. Like someone needs to benefit from their existence so that the people working on it can keep working on it. So I think from that perspective, I think the companies needs, how they support open source projects is important. And from that perspective, if you are doing something, an open source project, for instance, that's actually our process on Jozu. If we are going to open source something, we look at two things. Is that does it make sense for us to open source this? And is that something that we can support economically? Like, do we have an economic reason to open source this? Not just because we want to open source something, but we also want to open source something that we will be able to sustain for a while or forever, if ideally. So therefore, it makes there's so many open source projects with one contributor or no contributors other than the original initiators of the project. So we don't want to be at that state. And even if we are at that state, that shouldn't be a burden to us. It should be like what we want to do. This makes sense economically. So I think there are two facets to it. The first one is on a personal level, that's the best thing that you can do. And the second part of it is if you're a company trying to make a decision on contributing or open sourcing a project, in that case, I think the decision is, is open sourcing it is going to make it economically viable for you?
Mhm.
And people always assume that, I think we should note that people always assume that, oh, because you're giving it free and open source, it means that it is free, but it is not. Like a good example of that is Linux is free, Red Hat Linux is not. There is and people do prefer Red Hat Linux.
Yeah, so that brings me. One of the concerns that I hear normally when it's from a commercial organization that is planning to adopt something, the support available for open source compared to probably going in for a proprietary system. But on the other hand, I also have come across probably a majority of either people, teams, or organizations that want to use open source, partly free, even if it is a little paid for cost reasons, but not very, say, forthcoming in terms of supporting the open source movement.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather be.
Oh yeah, I know. I can think of a few companies like that.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on how do you say that, yeah, it is paid forward, but you also need to pay it forward in some form?
The way I look at it is they are basically shooting themselves at the leg, right?
Mm.
That's how I see it. And there are two reasons for it. The first one is, of course, you are depending your business on a piece of software that may or may not be supported, that may or may not be patched for security defects and so on and so forth in the next year or 2 or 5. Like if your software is not going to live for 5 years, then that's great. I haven't seen any software like that. But otherwise, you need to, like, if you're using an open source software, you need to consider this. Who is going to support this? Who is going to patch this? And if you're just using it and, in a commercial setting and reaping the benefits, but not thinking about this and finding a solution for it, then that's, bullet one to your leg. The second bullet is the security of it, right? It's like we have seen multiple times that when your supply chain can be poisoned, right? And this is not specific to open source software, but this is specific to any kind of secure supply chain for software. Is like, are you actually thinking about that? Like, are you consuming an open source project properly? That you have enough people in the project to patch your supply chain? Like, what happens if someone comes to your company and says, you know what, there is a security risk that I am seeing with your product, but the security risk is coming from some other open source project. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to the open source project and ask the contributors to fix it for you immediately, I mean, you have no control of that. If you are depending on this open source project as a strategic piece of your commercial offering, I think it's a huge risk that you are not contributing back or do not have enough expertise to patch these sort of bugs on the open source community. You need to be involved with that community, and that's actually part of your secure supply chain effort, as I see it.
So what have been some of the frustrations of working in open source for you?
Like when I first got involved with open source, one person came to me. He was I don't know if anyone remembers that, but we're working on some microsystems on a very prominent project, and he said, "Oh, so you're doing open source?" And I was like very early in my career, and it's like, "You're doing open source? Good, good. You will be famous, but not rich." So I mean, I don't know if that's true, but it's a joke. Like, but at a personal level, with the open source projects, the frustrations, I don't know. It has been so good to me so far. Of course, I didn't get rich, so the initial uh, the advice I got at that time was correct, but I did. I can't think, like, if I have to um, if I have to, at a personal level, I don't think I have any frustrations. I would do it again, get involved with even more open source projects if I can. But for the open source community, I have a few frustrations. One of them is something that you voiced, like the companies who are reaping benefits from these projects are not contributing back enough or ever. That's one of the frustrations. The other frustration I have is people assuming that people who are contributing to open source projects have to do something that you ask. Like, you go to a project and you say, "Hey, you know what? This is a bug. Fix it for me." No, that's not how it works. I'll fix that bug if I want to fix that bug, because you're getting this for free, so you're not really in a position to ask for anything or demand for anything. So that's a little bit frustrating. I think it comes from the misunderstanding of the open source as well. So I think that becomes a little bit frustrating if it happens. I think it happens less and less nowadays, but at some point it was really interesting to see that people were assuming that, "Oh, you know what? I asked for this, and it's going to be fixed, and it's going to be fixed in the way that I want it." So, so I think that's always frustrating. Another frustration that I have is the secure supply chain, or the lack of it on the lack of attention to it on the open source projects. There has been a lot of discussions, and open source projects are starting to move in a direction where they are able to support secure supply chain practices. But these practices require effort, they require resources, they require cost. They cost to the open source projects. Not all projects are able to afford that, and then there isn't too many forcing factors for the open source projects today. One of the things that I like about open source foundations like Linux Foundation, Eclipse Foundation, Apache Foundation, they are able to work with their open source projects on these practices and come up with ways to even share the cost of creating them. Therefore, I like those, and they are good and essential. I think they have they are going to have a lot of hard time trying to get to a state where they are able to apply these secure supply chain practices effectively. It's going in the right direction, but perhaps it should be faster.
You did mention it earlier, and then as I was just looking at how much time we have left, I must ask you one question in terms of a work-life balance. Does contributing to open source actively have an impact on that?
Yes. In the early days, okay, so I don't know if this is work-life balance question or problem. In the early days, I would spend a lot of time trying to do things on open source projects, but that's not because like I probably would did it at Nokia where my day job was open source and Red Hat as well. It was a little bit of, people have hobbies, right? So I always looked at it that way. It's like, oh, you could be building a model train or you could be contributing to an open source project. So that's how I looked at it a little bit. So yes, it can take a lot of time from you if you allow it to. I actually allowed it to because I liked contributing to open source project and being part of the community. But it is a commitment, so it's something that you need to think about as well.
So before we close, do you have any other messages that you want to share with our listeners? Something that we didn't cover?
I mean, open source projects, like they're always looking for contributors. Please do stop by community projects. We do have an open source project called kitops.ml that is supported by Jozu engineers. We do take PRs, documentation updates, videos, anything that you can contribute to our community, our artifact packaging. And it is an exciting new area. So we'd like to see you in the project as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think the way you described it, it sounds very exciting that when it's not just programming, even others could probably get a taste and probably get drawn to programming. Yeah, on that very encouraging note, thanks a lot, Gorkem, once again for sharing your perspective, your experience. And this was a really deep dive into how one can make a difference and contribute to the community through the open source movement.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.